Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on AuthorityLabs' next webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about international SEO. This is a really big subject, especially these days with so many SEOs and so many businesses going worldwide. And luckily, we have three of the best international SEO experts with us to share their journey as international SEOs and a few strategies along the way. So to get things started, I'd like to introduce you to Gabriella, Aleyda, and Michael. Michael, can you please kick us off with a little bit of background about how you really got into the SEO industry and perhaps some of the international SEO campaigns that you've done?
Sure. So thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be on the call with everybody here, and I'm really looking forward to what they have to say. So I hear myself all the time, so I'm like used to it, right? I started back in 1996, so that makes me a lot older than I look, unless I take my glasses off. This is poor man's Botox. See that? Covers that little line. So
Well,
I
you need
started in
to
96.
clarify that you're actually one of the first SEOs in the industry.
Yeah,
Ever.
yeah, I'm a pioneer. So I started with working in-house for a corporation developing their first SEO strategies back when nobody knew what it was. Nobody really believed me. Everybody was like, "Oh, that's not going to work." So I had this fear every day that SEO was going to be gone the next day, and especially when this paid search came along, and it really scared the hell out of me. And about 99, I left that. I founded a real estate portal. So that was my first, I was an entrepreneur. And then I went to work for a search engine as director of search. And from an SEO going to a search engine, it's like a kid in a candy store, because now you're like getting to learn like what is going on inside and having access to like blacklisting and everything like that. I swear to God, I played God for the whole entire time I was there. Never put an SEO in a search engine. We will, yeah. Anyways, and then I started another agency in 2001 and sold that in 2004. And what I did there was I integrated a lot of digital paid media into the SEO world and try to combine them. That did really well, and I sold the company, and then I realized that there's a market to take best practices in the US and put them abroad. So I started this company with the first office in China. We worked really well, and that's our first major client was Intel, and we launched Intel very successfully in the Chinese market, and they turned around and asked if we can do Japan, Korea, Russia, and pretty soon we started expanding all over the world. So I have contractors, consultants, partner agencies, employees, everything to develop a system that basically helps a lot of agencies with their clients, as well as direct clients that we have for multinational campaigns.
So to say you have experience would be an understatement then.
A little bit, tiny bit.
Well,
It doesn't seem like it though.
And Aleyda, can you share a little bit about how you got into the industry?
Yes, I started doing SEO in 2007. I was very lucky because before that I was a web designer, front and web developer. So it gave me the opportunity to continue like touching and covering a lot of the technical side, but also with the marketing aspect of it, which I also love, and the creativity of the content too. So it was like really quite good of a mix. And I was actually very lucky that I started working in SEO in an agency that was based in Spain, but most of the clients were all over the world, mostly travel and education type of clients, multilingual, multi-country. So that is how I started doing international SEO. It was pure luck, right? But it was actually the way how I learned SEO by default, right? Like having to optimize and target and configure everything for audiences that were in many countries and spoke many languages too. So yes, it was like, yeah, very serendipity-like type of situation for me.
It sounds like it. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Gabriella, could you share about how you got into the industry and some international campaigns that you've worked on?
Yeah, wow. I think I have a mix of both, a little bit of Michael and a bit of, Olivia. I started back in the .com. I mean, I've been in San Francisco 30 plus years, and I think the .coms was in the 90s. And so I'd say it was about 92, 93, but I was more in marketing. That was my forte. That was my groundwork, content development, marketing. And back then, we worked for huge sites that were international, but it was drug companies, porn companies. These were all the .coms that were coming out of San Francisco. And when you worked with content, we didn't know it was called SEO back then. You just had to, rank your content. So the fact that I had the marketing background, it kind of, just like Aleyda, I had to learn, how do you rank? What are these search engines? I mean, when I looked at, for this webinar, I did a little research because I wanted to know, back in 1995, when I started working in websites, there were 23,000 websites. Today, there's 1.74 billion websites. So imagine, the growth of, how do you communicate on a digital platform? Mm-hmm. And so, the content development, the marketing, that all kind of just meshed into, okay, well, let's focus on one thing, which is language, mm-hmm. which is, and the fact is, I'm Italian, sono italiana. So, the international just happened naturally. I mean, the French, the Arabic, the Spanish, the Italian, and people were like, well, you really should look at doing international. And so I learned, and Olivia remembers back in the day, we were a few women, learning and growing. And so from there, I've worked with huge international companies that were looking for either redesign or rebranding. And so, I brought that, agency know-how in order to let them streamline their team into, okay, how do we, break, the different countries into, international and content and this and that and the other. So there we are today. I have a team of 6. It's a small team, but we have been as large as 14, depending on, the content and the need and the client. But yeah, no, I love it. I love it because you're learning every day. I mean, it just keeps growing, right? So here we are.
Yeah. And we're all remote. It's important because we were talking before starting.
Oh, right. And we're all remote.
That we're all remote shows the power of global too.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, the clients, I should say the clients that I have aren't remote. They actually have brick and mortar. I mean, I have a couple that are local, mm-hmm. But they're also local in as far as 7, 8 locations. So yeah, they're in California, but they're also in Sacramento and Oakland and, mm-hmm. San Francisco. Mm-hmm. So they're real local, right? So, but globally, there's also, the ones that are, in California and also mm-hmm. in Italy and Germany and France and so on and so forth. So, yeah.
Yeah, and even piggybacking off of that thought, Michael, do you find that a lot of your clients will have a brick and mortar location and then they're online, they're trying to do international? Or is it usually companies who have multiple locations all throughout the world that need international SEO more? Do you see any patterns there with your clientele?
No, no. I mean, I've got such a massive range of different clients. So startups typically, they may be remote. They may be, a lot of companies will have a small office with some remoters around the country and a bunch of them internationally. That's a smaller company. But then you have the big brand companies. Medtronic, for example, is hugely publicly traded with hundreds of offices in every country, 100,000 employees or 30,000, I don't know, anywhere between that. So it's different. So it really differs.
Yeah,
What
I see the same
oh, go ahead.
in my case. Sorry, because for example, and this is interesting because indeed, like we are remote as providers or as consultants, right? But in my case, it's a real mix of well-established, worldwide known brands that do have like even offices in every location that we are targeting. So, for example, if we're targeting Brazil, they actually have an office in Sao
Right.
Paulo,
Right.
or in France,
Exactly.
they have an office in Paris. So to talk with the digital marketers, so they have this whole structure. So in order to implement changes, sometimes I need to travel there to be able to talk and influence a little bit the decision maker, the local decision maker, because it's a complex type of hierarchy, right? But on the other hand, I also have clients who are startups who need to grow exponentially because startups, right? And they target also multilingual international type of markets, and in some cases they are even remote or are quite flexible because they have this new company type of mentality. So yes, there's a little bit of mix in my case too.
Yeah, and I want to bring this up because it's very related to the topic. It's probably the number one challenge I deal with a lot is silos. And when you're dealing with multinational, international SEO, remember domestically, you have a silo already. You have SEO as a silo. You have IT as a silo. You have marketing as a silo. It's hard to get everybody to work together, and everybody who is in SEO on this call probably knows that. But then try doing that in 20 different countries and nobody talking to you, nobody talking to each other, everybody doing something different. You pull your hair out. I mean, that could be half your workload is dealing with that stuff.
We could spend an hour on this webinar on nightmare stories like that. I mean, I had my team here making changes while, people in Italy were, had already made the changes, and it was just this cross communication. And yeah, no. You have to implement exactly who's doing what, when, how. No other way around it.
What Michael just mentioned before is because it's usually in this type of situations, it's enterprise level type of SEO plus indeed the distributed type of organization, highly hierarchical in some cases, and then also the cultural differences and factors of some countries that might also differ. So it's very difficult that some person that is external go and request even changes like this. So yeah, it's there's a lot of this project management type of communication skills are very well needed for international type of SEO besides the technicalities, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Is there something that either of you could recommend in terms of communication? Because client communication is always a struggle for any SEO, even the best of clients. There's still communication expectation issues that arrive. So on an international scale, working with multiple countries, multiple different types of personalities and regions, are there any tools that you use, or is there any way, maybe even in the initial proposal or the deliverable, to where you really lay out what the communication, the expectations are? Or what would you recommend for an agency or a small business owner who's trying to get international SEO clients?
In my case, it's funny because whenever I am starting with a new client, I really validate a good fit to avoid headaches. And it actually sounds like if I am trying the client not to invest sometimes, because I always ask in international settings, do you really have resources to write or to localize in those languages? Do you actually have people who have that work internally or that you can contract to support the ongoing support of the customer or the users in these languages? So and so because a lot of clients, they think about international, I have the money just to start the implementation, the web settings, whatever, and they don't consider not only the initial localization and translation, but the ongoing costs that this will have, and the support that they will need in that language and country for the customer journey at a continuous basis, right? So for me, it is critical to validate and always ask, do you really have capacity? Is it because so many of them comes like, I want these dozens of markets or 50 markets all at the same time? It's like, why have you assessed or do you want me to first assess what is the potential in this market? Like, why do you want to target this market in the first place? Do you really have validated that you will have a potential positive ROIs or good benefits business-wise from those? Because in some cases, this is just because they heard about the potential of global,
right?
etc.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
And you need to validate, you need to verify it. Sometimes it's sad we don't have the influence and we're not the decision makers, right? But my job, I feel, is to alert, to advise, and validate first. And if they are willing and if there's flexibility, let's validate together. Let's assess and prioritize. Prioritization is super important. And then to verify too about the resources. Localization is critical. It's not about just translating what you have in your English version and that will work. No, these are like independent SEO processes in every single market at the end of the day, right? So indeed, validation of resources and the scoop and the actual commitment and potential from a business perspective for them is critical.
Yeah, and as far as tools, Slack is one. Slack is one for good communication. It really depends on the client and what they use for their internal communication systems. I always recommend Slack. It's just the easiest in terms of that. But I mean, Aleyda is spot on with everything you said. And remember, there's two challenges. You've got the small guys who are ready to go and ready to move forward. And they're like, I want to be in 30 countries in my budget. Right now I have $5,000 saved up and I'm ready, 30 countries. And you're like, oh my God, I don't even know if you can get in one. And then you have the big giant brands that, yeah, we have $4 million to put in this, but it takes 8 months to implement anything that you want implemented, you know.
Right.
So it's like, you know, so there's a grass is greener on the other side situation. You have to follow Aleyda's advice. And really understand the resources, the people, and make a smart move to really identify the markets.
I can add another thing to everything that they've said is whenever a company, a brand, or a small mom and pop or whoever, you know, comes in and says, oh, I want to be in 30 countries, we always start with a discovery, okay? And that's where we ask all these important questions. You know, have you looked at the 4 Ps? You know, I mean, I don't mean to sling marketing words, but, you know, product, promotion, place, price. You know, do you understand what that market looks like? Do you really have the boots on the ground, right? Because ultimately, yeah, we can localize, we can this. Do you have A, the budget, and B, do you have the follow through? So there's so this discovery that we actually go through, it's pretty extensive. Or so I've been told. But I'd rather, you know, err on the side of asking too many questions than getting to the point where all of a sudden we launch and, you know, God forbid, you know, there's no response on that end. You've already lost, right? So it's really important to understand that the client sometimes, you know, what's that saying here? Your eyes are bigger than your stomach. Right? You want all of it, but you can't because you physically can't and you budgetly can't. I don't know if budgetly is the word, but you can't.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you know what? It's very common now that you have mentioned that, Gabriella, you know, the typical situation that a client comes to you saying like, oh, I want SEO for all these markets, etc. And the first thing that you notice that they have the exact same content across all of this English-speaking markets or Spanish-speaking markets, or when the countries speaking the same language. And when I ask, it's like, why you haven't localized? Have you done audience research, competition research, keyword research to understand how? And they're like,
research, the best thing, absolutely.
And they are like, yeah, but we didn't have the resources to do that. Like, what we cannot differentiate the content. It's too much work. So my advice here is like, if they realize that there is so much work, it's because at some point they identify that the investment won't generate a profit. So if it won't generate a profit, why are you targeting that market in the first place? You want to target markets that will end up, having a positive ROI. And it will require an effort and investment. But if the market has potential and there are enough queries regarding and search potential and good trends for your offering, for your content. How cute, Gabriella.
Sorry, my secretary is bugging me. Sorry about that.
How cute, no problem. For your product, for your services, it will pay off in the mid or in the long run, right? So yeah, priorities.
Yeah, Aleyda, you had mentioned like audience research, keyword research. So say the clients signed on with you, you're at the beginning stages of doing a new SEO campaign. How do you determine what a site or brand's potential is going to be in their target country? So say you've done the pre-qualification with them, they're set on it, they have the budget, they're going to be patient enough, and they want to make this happen. What do you then do to let them know whether or not they're qualified for that area?
Indeed. So purely from an SEO perspective, right? Because from a business perspective, etc., there are many other factors that will play a role here. What I will do is I will go and take a look which are the top players in that industry, in that market, and I will start seeing what are the traffic sources, what is the share of their traffic that is coming from search, from organic search. And in the organic search, I will identify which are the top terms, which are the top pages. If these are terms and pages that are actually relevant or that will be covered by my client and are relevant for them, and to try to understand also what is the level of competition. If it is too hard to compete, if these are properties that have been there for forever and they have millions of backlinks and all of the authority in the world, or if it is a newish type of markets and these are players that are not necessarily that difficult to compete with and their content is not already so optimized and they are already reaching this type of organic search traffic and search volume. So I will identify the already existing first traffic for the top players in that market, and then I will, based on that as an input, I will generate like a full keyword research to understand the potential, the trends, what is the gap, what is the opportunity there, and based on that, I will advise to see what there's there for them and their plans, right?
And whether or not it makes sense.
Or
Michael,
not,
yes, exactly. So Michael, so say, okay, Aleyda's qualified them, this location's going to be good. How do you then start working on the idea of building authority and trust in a brand new region? So it's one thing for a corporate business to just pop up in a brand new country, and that takes a lot of time to build repertoire with potential customers in person. Online, I can imagine it could be even more difficult because there's so many other sources for someone to shop or so many other sites to get content from. So how do you start working on building trust and authority for a client?
Okay, well, first of all, I'm glad that you said that, because that's probably the most critical piece of international SEO is developing trust. And I say developing trust, not just trust from a technical aspect, but local trust. Remember, you're competing with a lot of companies that if I'm in Germany and I see a German company and they are talking to me, they understand my tone, they understand what I'm looking for. It's very difficult for me to side with some American firm that just did some translation and popped it there. You're not developing trust with me. It's just the same in the US. If some, say a Chinese site pops over, I mean, you're really suspicious, even if you see some words that are off or whatever, like I'm not going to give them my credit card. Well, that's the same all over the world. And in some cases, more so. Some countries, there's some research done, I think it's done by Jupiter, that shows trust in advertising in organic search. And it goes around the world to every country and says that Germans trust the least, or other countries trust the least compared to Americans. So you have a lot of building to do. So let me jump into your question a little bit, but I'm going to follow up on Aleyda's answer too, just to kind of wrap things up, because one of the things that I like to do is a market scoring system, and it's taking everything Aleyda said and then putting it into a spreadsheet. And it's basically what I do is I take a spreadsheet, I put my markets that I want to go in, say 5, 6, 7 countries, and then I do everything Aleyda mentioned. First, I'm going to look at the analytics. How much traffic from X country is coming to the site? Is there a bounce rate? Are they just coming there because they accidentally land on your page and they're looking for something else? So look at that to help identify. Next thing I do is to analyze the keyword and language challenges. How difficult is it going to be to build trust, right? Germans, like I said, may be harder to build trust with than somebody in Spain. So that's a factor that's going to make a difference. International competitor strength and local competitor strength. You've got two competitors. You got the multinationals that are competing with you, and you got the local guys competing with you. And that's two challenges right there. And that could be too heavy to, you know, to compete with. So factor that into your spreadsheet. UX challenges, right? So there's fonts and colors that just do not work with different markets. China, my God, you can't take what you have here in the US and think it'll work in China. It doesn't work that way. You've got firewalls, all kinds of stuff. So you have that challenges. You have infrastructure challenges. A smaller site is much more flexible to implement hreflang and other technologies, where a large giant site that has legacy here and there, and then I'm going to make everybody on the call cringe. Then they do a site migration of like 5 different companies that they purchased, and they're like, oh, can't figure out why it's not working. You know, that. I mean, it's like a year's worth of work dealing with that stuff. So that's part of it, and brand popularity. So all of things. So to answer your question, I'm sorry it took so long, but I just wanted to kind of frame up what Aleyda does, put it in a spreadsheet. You identified the markets. Second, build trust, and that is with localization, right? A local expert that understands their market. Now, there's an expense to this, and there is a way to do it. Now, I am not a fan of Auto or Google Translate. If you want to start with Google Translate, you can start with it on your own, and you don't show anybody that, nobody that. You just look at it, okay? And then you find a translation company. This is a cheap way. Translation company will do word for word translation. But still, that's not the tone of the market, right? Especially in search, because people search differently. But now you've got Google Translate, now you got Translate, and now you go to a local expert and say, okay, here's the stuff I found. I know it's going to be wrong. Can you look through all of this, clean it up, maybe transcreate, rewrite, help me make my brand stand out and develop trust in this market? And that's the way to do it. Don't publish anything like Google Translate or depend on different tools, because it's like I said in the beginning of this long ass response is you don't want to say, you don't want to mess up and call somebody's mother or something.
So if I can just throw in a little more, but I'll wrap it up real tight. So think globally, act locally, right?
Yes.
So if I can, I mean, because, you know, or another wrap up would be the EAT method, right? You know, expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness locally, whether that's going to be with recommendations, whether it's going to be with, you know, sales, if it's a mom and pop shop, you know, I mean, there's so many variables, but again, you know, globally, locally.
A local telephone, even an address, even if it is on a co-working space. In this, how do you establish trust? How do you think that these people will want to give their credit cards on your website?
Exactly. If they need to know that you're like them. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And something each of you kind of touched on was, okay, you're building the trust from a local level, but part of building that trust is getting seen above the competition. So when you're doing international SEO, you're not just competing against all the other global brands, but you're also competing from a local scale. And as a consumer, what can make me choose a global brand over a local is usually a price point. But from an SEO perspective, Gabriella, what kind of advice can you give in terms of first dissecting who your competitors are on a local and global scale, and second, how do you defeat them? How do you rank above them?
Well, I mean, once you've established, who the competitor is, for example, what that particular keyword is that they're ranking for, there's nothing wrong with looking at your competitor. What we do is, once we figure out who the local competitor is, what the keywords are, we'll grab, 10 and do a cross section of keywords. Okay. And then the ones that come up the highest, we'll start digging a little deeper. So when we focus on global, like I said, we go back into local. So we might have two sets of competitors. And I have a team that likes digging into numbers. And, I sometimes do too. But more than that, we capitalize on that for the client. So sometimes that means taking a little extra time. So depending on how large the client is, we, use those keywords in order to elevate, whether we're doing a PPC campaign, for example, so ultimately, sometimes you get a data set from one competitor and it might not be the same as the other. So now you have to merge them together. So those are going to be the defining information that's going to move you up in top billing. And that's ultimately the sale, right? I mean, why are people wanting to go to the top? Because they want to sell something. So ultimately, once you're on the top, you've brought them in. Now you've got to start digging a little deeper. Did they stay on the site? Did they leave right away? What happened? And, as Michael mentioned, in China, you can't use certain things that you can in Spain or, in different countries in Latin America, right? So, again, there's so many nuances, and I work with words, with content. So I have to make sure that, euphemisms and, things like that, idioms that, you don't insult a certain, we had a company that sold these drinks that was going international, right? But when they came to us, they were already in trouble in Italy, okay? And that's why they came to us. They were already in the middle of a lawsuit, 250,000 euro lawsuit, and they wanted us to help them get out of, and it was all because they didn't understand the laws concerning, selling that type of drink. Here we have the FDA, I think, for the Food and Drug Administration. In Italy, they have something different, but they did not follow those guidelines, see. So once again, you're looking at, there's so much involved, but at least if you go back to the data, you look at the keywords, you know what they are, you've got a fighting chance to not only, compete, but rank. And ultimately that's going to bring in sales. No?
Yeah, if I can add a couple of things, right, regarding the competition locally, it's tricky because indeed, like when you go to any market, most cases right now, there are already players there, right? That if it is a profitable market, there will be quite a few players already. And for those players that are local though, many of them will have, in some cases, local CCTLDs. So the advantage of the global brand, right, the global website trying to compete there is that they come with a very likely highly authoritative .com GTLD, right? So for those cases, it's about identifying the opportunities, right? It's true that this all CCTLD has, I don't know, a few hundred thousands of links coming from that specific country, from that specific languages, type of content, highly relevant from the local ecosystem, web ecosystem, and that is going to be very hard to beat if you want to go head to head, right, at the start at least, right? But strategically, you want to, for example, leverage your global authority, your already existing authority in your previous market. If you had a .com, to reuse that with a subdirectory instead of going with specific CCTLDs with every market, which I think is one of the things that a lot of people do without realizing that it's better to consolidate at least at the start with the already existing the domain and property that you already have, and leverage that instead of starting from scratch, right? So it's about that, to understanding, depending on what's the local profile of those markets, where are their strengths, where are their weaknesses too. They certainly have, for sure, and try to build targeting those too. Yeah.
And Ashley, you mentioned this when you started that question. It's not about price. I mean, you could get, in Germany, for example, price could be a turnoff. If a lower price could be a turnoff, higher price actually can build trust. It really depends on the market and how they work. Also, you know, is when you're looking at content, right? Specifically around content, it could be how much research people do. For example, in China, I'll give you this example. I had some tires, some Porsche tires, right? And I put them up for sale. Some Chinese guy came over and he had this chart. And I'm like, oh, what's that? I already told you the brand and the size. He goes, no, I need to look at some other numbers. So he looks at the numbers inside the tire, inside all these numbers, and writes it all down. Next thing I know, he's like putting in these spreadsheets and everything. I'm like, what are you doing? And he goes, my customers actually want to know everything, like where the manufacturer is located that made the metal that's in the tire. What are the, you know, how long is the rubber? I mean, all of these things. So you have countries and languages where they go deep level into research.
Yeah.
Germans do that too. Really deep level in the search.
And their purchase behavior. I don't know if you have heard this. Speaking about Germany, you just reminded me. It was not my experience, but an experience of an SEO friend of mine who was doing an optimization process for an e-commerce company, clothing company in Germany, when he realized that people in Germany, it seems that it is normal for them to buy a lot online and return half of the stuff that they buy after trying and testing a bit. And that is quite normal and culturally accepted, because they were very used to buy like this even before online, but because of the catalog shopping, right? So you cannot just assume that, for example, that was very shocking to see the return of all these products at the end of the month, and that the profits were not the ones that he expected, just because of the conversion rate at the beginning, right? Because all of the returns. So you need to actually test and verify the shopping behavior, not only the search, but the shopping and the overall behavior of the customer. Indeed.
Absolutely. Returns. We have a customer that, you know, has free returns. I can imagine how that would end up costing them a fortune, right? So there, once again, all these little nuances, all these little things, you know, which I hate to say, a lot of SEOs, whether you're international or local or marketing even, the word depends. It does depend, especially when you're dealing with international, because it is so complex. Because there's so many things that you have to, you know, take into consideration. So, you know, and that's what makes it, I guess, international different than local. It's the complexity, right? It's almost like local is like playing checkers, and international is like playing chess, you know, because you have so many different moves you have to make, you know, in order to get to point B, whereas the local, you know, it's, you know, directory and citations, you know, it's, you know, going to be whatever, you know, your strategy A, you know, 4 blogs per month, yada, yada, you know, you have an idea. But when it's international, it's a different rodeo, no?
Yeah. And there are actually, I have to say, different levels of that. And it's not even like black and white like that, because, for example, in the US, a while ago, I had a client in the US trying to target Spanish speakers in the US. And they already had a website in English, very well established website, but they were launching one in Spanish and they wanted my validation. And then I started to do a research, and it was quite tricky to see the query patterns, because yes, you could see the influence from Mexican Spanish there, but it depended on the area. In California, it was more Mexican Spanish. In New York, it was completely something different, of a mix with Caribbean type of terms,
Puerto Rican,
Puerto Rican. Indeed, in Florida is Cuban, a lot of terms. So it's like, how do you optimize every single? You cannot like established patterns or standards, like depending on the state that you wanted to optimize the offering for, it was completely different. So yeah, there are so many different layers that you can dig in at the end of the day.
It's a very, very complex world in SEO. That's why there's not that many of us. You got to be out of your mind.
Cheers.
It's so complex. And just one thing, I've seen this happen many times. People will think that, okay, I'm ranking really well in the US with my 5,000 keywords, and I can't figure out why I'm not ranking well in France. Well, shit, you only have 50 keywords. So you take 50 keywords. I mean, they don't take things seriously. If you really want to do well in the market, put it in your all. I mean, you have to do as much work as you did in the US if you really want to compete.
So what would be an appropriate number of keywords then?
Oh gosh, seriously, that's that. It
Let me
really
just throw it on you.
depends. I like, you know,
It's going to be
so
hounded
it
by the
depends
SEO
on,
community. I wouldn't answer.
yeah, it really depends on the client and the product and how many products they have and everything. So,
Right.
you know, for me, it's like I like to at least start with 10 keywords per page researched.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of, that helps me at least identify things and drill down from there if I need to.
Right.
Yeah, indeed. It needs to be tied at the end of the day with the number of pages and the content that you have, right? And what you cannot expect is like, exactly, if you had 50 keywords, probably you had what, 10 pages or something like that. Like you cannot expect to make much with 10 pages or 15 pages targeting a market. Indeed, you need to actually prioritize, but prioritize well and be reasonable with the prioritization too. Yeah.
In terms of prioritizing, Michael, how important would you say site structure is when it comes to international SEO? What would, like in a perfect world, what's a makeup of site structure to really help ranking international?
No, you have to ask me the technical stuff, and Aleyda is the technical genius, so I'm gonna let her take this question more than me.
Just pass that one down the box.
I will, because I am a fan of hers, and I'm amazed by the things that she comes up with when I see her speak. So I love her talking about this particular subject. Doesn't mean I don't know it, but I like Aleyda's answers to that question. Number one, there is something I do want to mention though. In terms of a structure, an example, I like to use the example of Xerox. So if you go to Xerox.com and look at their country selector, right, you can see how they actually emphasize a subdirectory model for countries that maybe they don't have a lot of market penetration in. And then the countries that they have a lot of penetration in, they have CCTLDs. And the way that they have designed their infrastructure as a big country is a really good best practice to look at. So, you know, that's one of the things. In terms of all the other elements, hreflang and all of these other things, I think Aleyda's best to speak on this, to be honest with you. It's all yours, Aleyda. Go for it.
Take it away.
For me, it's actually an alignment thing. This is the thing. A lot of people at this point, and I really want to clarify this because I get these questions like, I have hreflang correctly implemented. Why Google is not ranking this well? It's one of many signals. It's important to align every possible signal to refer to Google that this web structure here is actually targeting this language or this country, and it needs to be consistent, right? So whatever web structure you choose, what is important is that everything under that structure is consistently targeted to that specific market, that specific language, right? And yes, you can choose from CCTLDs to subdirectories, subdomains. From what I have seen, usually if you don't have all the resources in the world, usually it tends to pay off to start with a subdirectory that can be geolocated through the Google Search Console. Specific directories can be registered, and then with the international targeting setting that is still in the old UI of Google Search Console, in the old one, I am like crossing fingers, like, why is this in switch yet to the new one? Let's see. But yes, it's still there, and we should make use of it. So that is important to geolocate each subdirectory to the relevant one. That, besides, of course, the usage of hreflang annotations, to give additional signals, which is the page, especially when we are targeting different markets with the same language, to refer which is the right version that should target the UK or the US or Australia in English specifically. And then, of course, with hreflang, sometimes the issue that I see a lot is the overlay, right? Some brands, because of certain requirements, they do have a Latin American version, but there's no way to specify this with hreflang, or they want a global version and they also want the US one, but they sometimes, for some reason, they don't want to show the US one to they don't want to show the global for these other markets. For Australia, they really want to push the US one. So there's some very like tricky needs sometimes for certain brands, and unfortunately there's only so much that you can do with hreflang. hreflang supports languages and countries. They don't support regions or continents right now, unfortunately. So there's only so much that you can do and to tag effectively the countries. And what is really, really recommended is to align every single signal. So for example, the name of the country in the metadata, within the whole information, even the address or telephone if you can. So all the signals to align correctly well to properly geolocate, to signal which is the target market for that specific version, right? And yes, indeed, what you mentioned before about the ccTLDs, if you are a very powerful brand with all of the links in the world and you don't need to care about compete with other domains in new countries that will have millions of links, and you start with a new property with zero, do ccTLDs. Maybe, I don't know, indeed, Xerox, Coca-Cola, and brands like this, they can get away with it and they'll be fine, right? If you really don't have all the resources for link building, especially establish authority at the beginning, and you don't want to start from scratch, usually starting little by little with subdirectories that you can geolocate to each country tends to pay well, right? But again, it's a big depends, and you will need to actually validate the market to see which are the players there, what is Google giving prominence to, etc. So yeah.
And adding to that, you've got structured data implementation to think about, keywords around intent. So there's a lot of different factors, but I will say something: don't mess up your hreflang. It can cause chaos.
That and your canonical. If you get those two, oh my God!
Thank you very much for mentioning the canonical.
For a nightmare.
Yeah, and another very common question regarding hreflang and canonical is like, oh, what should I do with the canonical? Should I canonicalize to my original version? Because in the mind of the people, they have an original version that is the initial one, usually the English one. Like, no, each version is its own original. And then there is this other scenario of people who really overthink this, saying, oh, Aleyda, I have this content for my UK version, and my page for the US is exactly the same. But realistically, I have done the keyword research, and I offer the same product, and people in both countries search the same way, right? So this person is one of those scenarios when if you don't really need to change, why would you? Why do you need to be pushed to change something if your offering is the same? If the audience searches in the same way, like luckily you're in one of these very situations that you don't need to change nothing in some cases, right? So, but people overthink and think that they are doing something wrong. It's like, at the end of the day, it should be about connecting with the way that the audience will search, right? And that is what is really critical. Then on the other hand, you can be in the other extreme, right? You can be in one of those sectors that every single country talks about this specific particular term in a different way. Like, for example, in Spanish, the term car, oh my God, auto, carro, coche, like every single country has its own way to, or to rent, rentar, alquilar, arrendar. Oh, so you can go in different ages or situations, right? So maybe you are lucky and you are one of those that you don't need to change much. Lucky for you, you don't need to canonicalize to an original version. It's not an original one. It's targeting well its own audience, right? So yes.
Yeah, if it's not broken, don't try and fix it. So we're at the point, we already have questions coming through. If you have any questions and you haven't asked yet, go inside that question box, fill it in, and we will do our best to get to all of them. First, I want to start with Frank's because it's on the technical side of things, and shout out, hey Frank. Any one of you who can answer this, please do. When you have multilingual sites, how do you choose which is the canonical when you have 8 pages in different languages, all the same content?
Who wants to, do you want me to?
You
all
see my
you,
fingers?
Aleyda.
They're pointing at you.
Your
Michael,
assistant
you
there.
have to do this.
No,
I have
realistically,
a
it's like
different one. I think she's, yeah. I mean, her answer just previously
You
like
take
touched
the
a lot
time.
on
Go
that.
for it.
So go
Yeah.
for it later.
yeah, I just replied to this. I mean, if the content is duplicate because like all of the markets that you target speak the same language, and it has a reason to be duplicate because people search the exact same way across all of these markets, you don't need to canonicalize to an original version. All of them are their own original versions, so you should self-canonicalize because they are their own unique versions targeting that specific audience, right? However, it's a little bit weird that 8 markets or how many markets they all will search in the exact same way. So what I will recommend to do is to verify and if people actually how people search around these topics for all of this pages in all of these markets, and see how really what is the effort for you to differentiate these pages. Because for me, what it will be painful that you have all of these different variation or versions of languages or targeting different markets for different countries, even if the language is the same, and you just canonicalize to one and don't make the most out of it. But because when you canonicalize only to one version, you're saying to Google, this is the original version, and only that version will be the one shown
right.
in search results. And if you already have the web structure targeting the Australian market, why do you want to show the US one, right? For example.
Yeah, and not only that,
Yeah.
I'll throw in a real, like a live example. In Blizzard, I hope you're listening. Blizzard, listen to this because I've told you guys this a million times. In Argentina, when you search for Blizzard's product, World of Warcraft, or one of their products, you will see what's ranking is the Mexican Spanish pages, but the Argentinian Spanish pages ranking further below. Now, here's the problem. If those Argentinian pages land on page 2, nobody's looking at them. They're going into the Mexican. And yeah, they're reading it. Their trust level's a little, oh, this is Mexican Spanish. It's a little different. I'm not sure I trust. But shoot, everything's in pesos. I can't buy. So I am leaving this because everything's in pesos here. In Mexican pesos, it's not going to work with my currency in Argentina. That's a way to lose a lot of business. The other is, I won't say the name, I'm just picking on Blizzard for that because I told them. The other is another big brand where they decided in hreflang to just do a shortcut. We'll just put LA for all of Latin America. We'll cover every country. That's all right. And they're a major brand. Look at Aleyda's face. Exactly.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So all these people in Laos are like, what the hell is this? You know?
Literally, I don't understand why people they want to come up with their own country codes or language codes. Like it follows a standard. It is specified in Google's documentation.
Did you do a video on that, Olivia? You have a video on the hreflangs and implementation. It was wonderful. You guys should link to it on this this webinar.
Thank
you
you,
guys,
thank you.
The Twitter world.
Definitely. Yeah.
And Bill has some great tools.
Actually,
Bill has some
LA code is actually for Laos.
Yeah, that's why I said.
Right.
I mean, all these people in Laos are like wondering why they're getting all these Spanish pages.
Our next question from Zonzo, and perhaps Michael, this one may be a good one for you. Have you ever ranked anything in North Korea, and do you have any tips?
North Korea? Did you say North Korea? North Korea. No, I haven't ranked anything in North Korea. I've yet to find a client that has asked me for North Korea. But that's a good question.
Is that the Gonzo? Is that who's asking the question?
I know.
Yes.
Johnny.
There's so many things I want to say, but I'm trying to be more PC these years.
Yes, please, me, Michael. You don't want to joke with that.
All right,
More
on to
Korean
the
jokes.
question from Rebecca. What's the best tool for international keyword research? So let's talk tools. What are you guys using?
I have to say that because of all of the supported countries, of course, you want to use as many data sources that you want, and I don't use a single tool, but because of all of the countries that are supported, I tend to use, like, my default first tool to use is SEMrush. Then I will use also Keyword Finder to complement data. Then, of course, the AdWords, Google owns tools to validate with the search data too, search volumes there. But yes, I will say that if you have limited resources and you cannot have many tools, SEMrush covers pretty well all of the markets probably, and or most at the end. And then, of course, complement what the search data with Google. Run a little campaign just to be able to have access to more specific search volumes there. And yes, I will say that these two will be like the top two ones for me. Yeah.
I would say,
yeah, SEMrush, Mons.
you can read that.
Oh,
AuthorityLabs. Authority.
I can read it.
Absolutely. AuthorityLabs.
I can read it.
Another
Sorry.
tool. Bill Hunt has a great tool, hreflang builder. It's a really good tool to analyze problems, especially enterprise level problems with hreflang. Aleyda has some really great stuff when it comes to analyzing.
Yes.
Yeah, the generator. I mean, there's some great tools
I have
there.
a tool. The one of Bill Hunt's tools to validate hreflang. If you are serious about hreflang and if you have many and complex type of web organization across many different markets, I will highly suggest to eliminate a few headaches from you and go and check out his tool, because it's the hreflang builder, it is called.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. I think that's going to wrap it up. There's a couple more questions that we didn't get enough time to go over. If you have any questions for these individuals, please go follow them on Twitter. You can also reach out to them on LinkedIn. Thank you, Michael, Aleyda, and Gabriella, for joining us and sharing your expertise.
Thank you for the
It's
chance.
insanely amazing. Appreciate you all, and definitely go follow these guys on social. You do not want to miss what they have to say. Thank you, and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.